everybody. Zach Elliott at Feel Free to Argue. And I wanted to spend some time this morning talking about BP's unparalleled public relations success in the Gulf. Now, a lot of people laugh when I say that, talking about how much everybody hates BP and stuff like that. Well, I'm here to disabuse you of that notion because I want to tell you that BP has done an amazing job of snowing everybody as to the true consequences of the Gulf disaster. What we're going to talk about first is the harms to civil rights coming out of this in terms of lack of access. Second, we're going to talk about the animal kills that have been hidden by BP. We're going to talk about the relation to the climate legislation. And finally, we're going to talk about some conclusions that we can draw from this whole thing. First, I want to talk about the damages to civil liberties that were done as a course of this. When you see journalists, private citizens, etc., being chased away from beaches, the amount of information that we've been able to get about stuff relating to the Gulf has been really infinitesimal. And it's because the government has been acting in collusion with BP to help them hide things. So, take for example, when James C. Fox, an investigative journalist down in Louisiana, was trying to find out what happened to all this sand that was bagged up at beaches. Where did it go? What was done with it, etc. No one would tell him, which was amazing to begin with. He called around, couldn't find, so he ended up following one of these, fucking trucks, for hours and hours, until it went into this facility, which was, of course, as everything associated with the cleanup, it was protected by police. So, who would not let him into the facility. I mean, he could just drive around it, and he said it smelled really nasty, and the whole thing was, surrounded by fencing. But he couldn't get in to see anything, couldn't get in to talk to anybody about what was going on in there. Also, this will become very relevant when we talk about the animal kills later. Scientists are also not getting access to the water to be able to run tests because they have no interest in letting people know just how bad things have gotten. This same James Fox took a sample from way out near what they called the source, which is where the spill was, and they found out that even taking the oil out of the sample and just leaving the corexit in there, that for just one chemical within the corexit, they found 150 times the lethal dose for marine life. So you're talking about 150 times. Now, this leads into, well, actually, no. I want to talk about one more thing here first. And you have these kinds of limited reports taking place as like individuals do testing. I'm also going to link to the James Fox videos, both of those videos. Also going to link to a Channel 5, a local channel down in, I believe it was Alabama, who tested a bunch of water. And your accepted amount of oil, and they were just testing for oil, not the other chemicals in the water, but they were testing for oil. The acceptable amount of oil in the water is 5 parts per million. The various places that they tested, all places where people were allowed to be and were deemed safe, were 12 to 200 parts per million. I'm going to link to that as well. They say that some of the highest recordings that they got were from areas where kids were digging and like digging down in the sand, and then the water collected, in the bottom of their hole, and they took samples from the holes where the kids were playing, and that's where they were getting the 200 parts per million. Also blows my mind that people did not cancel their Florida vacations and still let their kids play in the water. I mean, I know that everyone's lying to them and saying that it's safe, but you should assume that everybody's lying to you and it's not safe. And let's get into this really big thing now, though. I want to talk about the animal kills, because this is something that has been totally kept off of, the nation's radar. You look at the articles that I'm going to link to by Jerry Cope. Look at the interview done with marine biologist Ricky Ott. You'll understand that there's a huge animal die-off that is being hidden from us and has been hidden from us very successfully at this point. There are reports from people who are out near the source talking about just bodies and carcasses as far as the eye could see of like everything. You know, fish, dolphins, birds, whales, everything. And there are talks about how these things were moving towards the land, and then somewhere between these huge, you know, masses of dead carcasses, like being near the source and making landfall, they all just disappeared. And my guess about this, based on what I've read, is that there are natural rips where several currents run together and the carcasses tend to congregate in that area. My guess is that BP sent trawlers and crews to those areas where the rips are and collected the masses of bodies. And if you read the articles, you also see that, you know, how diligent they've been about collecting carcasses from the land. Now, why is this important? I mean, of course, you know, if these carcasses are dead, something needs to be done with them anyway. The important part of it, though, is how this relates to liability. Every single one of these animals is owned, essentially, by we the people. And every one of them that is killed by BP, BP is liable for. Take, for example, looking back at the Exxon Valdez. In the Exxon Valdez disaster, you have all of the carcasses that were collected by workers being put under triple lock and key until they could assess how many animals had been killed total. Now, the other thing you have to do then is you have to do drift studies, because the ones that make landfall are only a small proportion of the ones that die in general. So you need to do drift studies to find out what proportion of the total animals that were killed actually made it to landfall. So this is why you have to save these things and why you have to do these studies. They're not being saved and the studies are not being done. So what you're doing is you're having the United States government, because, you know, NOAA's involved in this, the Coast Guard is involved in this. You have the United States government hiding liability for BP, so that they will not have to pay and they can get off easier than they would otherwise. And finally, let's talk about the climate legislation. Actually, let's not. That's like a whole nother video. But I'd like to point out that the weakened law that was only supposed to basically increase the liability caps could not be passed in the wake of the BP disaster. Now, if you don't think that, like, you know, the oil and gas industry has us by the fucking balls, when we can't even pass, like, you know, a law increasing liability after the BP disaster, then I don't know what kind of crack you're smoking. Finally, one thing that BP is doing at this point is asserting the end of operations, and that's what it's trying to do. That's why it's been, you know, talking so much about how, you know, the well cap is holding, why it's talking so much about, you know, supporting the U.S. government's assertion that like 75% of the oil has magically disappeared, because they want it to be over. They're already pulling back on the cleanup crews. They're already pulling back on everything, the skimmers, everything, because they want this to be over, and now they're in the money management phase where they're trying to beat down everybody's claims to the minimum amount possible. And that's the phase that we're in right now. But of course, as far as BP concerned, the whole thing has been a liability management exercise. And as that has, you know, in terms of that, it's been enormously successful. I mean, people are so fooled that they're letting their kids play in toxic waters because they've been convinced that it's been safe. So what conclusions can we draw from this? One, if a significant industry wants you not to know or see something, you won't. Two, the government will take the side of illegal polluters against the people that are affected by the pollution. If you need any evidence of that, you can look at the way the government has been acting down there, you know, in Alabama, in Florida, in Louisiana. There's lots of evidence of this point. And finally, more to the point, the government will help corporations hide wrongdoing and avoid paying legitimate costs of their business. And who will pay? Because, I mean, these things will either not get cleaned up and people's lives and environments will be ruined, or They will be cleaned up, and BP won't pay. We will. But either way, it's not good, and we don't even know how bad a disaster it is, because BP's public relations has been tremendous and very successful. But please check out the links, and I guess it's not a sidebar anymore, the underbar, and see what you think. I mean, do you think most people are getting the full story? I really don't think so.